Welcome to the latest episode of Corboy and Demetrio's video podcast, Masters of Trial Law. Today, we are discussing cases involving trucks and trains with two Masters of Trial Law as our guests, Philip H. Corboy Jr. and Conrad Nowak. And I am Bill Gibbs, a partner here at Corboy and Demetrio, and I'm joined by my co-host, Ken Lumb.
As Bill mentioned, we have two outstanding panelists joining us today. Our partner and friend, Philip Corboy Jr., known very affectionately as Flip, and Conrad Nowak. Conrad spent 18 years as a defense attorney before joining us in 2023. And I'm sure he will enlighten us today with his extensive experience in transportation negligence cases, as well as give us some insight into the defense perspective, as long as you don't violate any attorney-client confidences.
So, Flip, you've been here a few years longer than Conrad. Tell us how your legal career got started.
Well, I got out of law school in 1977, became a lawyer, and went to work for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, which was probably the most wonderful experience if you want to learn how to try cases. You learn how to think on your feet. You learn how to be surprised by what witnesses oftentimes say, even though they told you something different maybe 10 minutes earlier in preparation. You had a potpourri of like different charges. You start off in the misdemeanor courts. I still remember my very first jury trial where the three witnesses against me were three Roman Catholic nuns. There was a demonstration on the south side. This is back when the Nazis had taken over Marquette Park, and they were marching. And there was a convent somewhere in the city of Chicago where three nuns went in order to defend the Jewish community. Well, they went there, and there was a young member of the Jewish Defense League, believe it or not, a young lady, who started whacking away on a couple of police officers that were undercover trying to protect the order of this, what turned out to be a riot. And I just remember that the police insisted that we try the young lady. Okay, there's a relationship between the state's attorney's office and the police. We did it, and all of a sudden I got the discovery, which, as we know, is the documents to say who somebody is going to present as witness. And I got sister married this, sister married this, and sister married this. I had to cross-examine three Catholic nuns. Now, you have to understand, I was an altar boy, grades 1 through 8, at St. Joan of Arc Parish in Skokie, Illinois. Now, how difficult it is to cross-examine three nuns?
Extremely.
Yeah. And yes, by the way, I'm sure you were going to ask. I lost that case. But then you move on to certain aspects of the criminal justice system. And I ended up for the last couple of years of my tenure in the office as the first chair at 26 California, trying nothing but murders, rapes, and armed robberies, things of that nature.
So when did you move?
Wonderful experience.
When did you move to the civil side of things?
1985. I came over here as a young assistant. It was fun. I got to work with Tom Demetrio on a lot of cases. I made a lot of friends here in the office, and I'm still here, believe it or not. 40 years later.
Well, we're lucky to have you with us.
Thank you.
Today and every day.
I'm lucky to be here still, believe me.
So have you had some experience with train cases? We're going to talk about trucks and train crashes. Have you had some experience with trains?
I have. One of our former partners and myself had a case out in Rockford, Illinois that got a lot of publicity. Canadian National Railroad was going through the town of Rockford, and there was a heavy rain that was going on at the time, and the railroad tracks actually started to come apart. There is a concept in railroading where if there is a lot of water and a lot of rain, the area underneath railroad tracks starts to come undone. And when that happens, all hell breaks loose. And as they were about a mile away from an intersection where our clients were waiting for the train to clear the track so they could go through, all of a sudden the train conductor noticed that something was wrong, and as a result notified the police. The police did not do something right away, as they probably should have. And right when it got to the intersection with this street where our clients were in a car waiting for the red light to clear, the railroad came off the tracks, hit the ground, and exploded in a huge fireball. There's a lot of video to show what the fireball looked like. And what happened was there was 18 cars of ethanol on there, and every one of those ethanol cars exploded.
Whoa.
And our poor clients, a mother, a father, and a daughter, were in a truck that was consumed by the fire itself.
I think we have some video that we might be able to pull up to have you just kind of explain exactly what it is that you were dealing with that day. That's the aftermath of the derailment?
Yeah, and see that car there?
Yeah.
That's our client's car.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
What a terrible tragedy. So we were retained by the family that was in that car?
Yes.
And how did that case turn out?
It turned out we ended up getting a $22 million settlement. We were ready for trial. My former partner from here and I, we went to Canada a number of times. Again, it was a Canadian National Railroad train. And in this particular case, which we found is very similar in railroad cases, there was a lot of deny by the defendants. And all of a sudden, we had to impeach them with recordings that they had made to the Rockford Police Department, recordings that they made to their offices in Toronto as in Montreal, where their corporate headquarters is, and we eventually settled the case. It's unfortunate that the husband's injuries were as much psychological as they were physical, but his wife,
why.
yeah, but his wife
Experiencing that.
absolutely burned to death. And what was really scary about it, she got out of the car, as did her husband, as did their daughter, and they started running what they thought was for safety. And she got caught, and she actually burned to death halfway between the car and the railroad tracks, where the video shows the fire was. They couldn't approach her until the following morning. When I say they, I mean the first responders, the police department and the railroads, because she was smoking so hard and had actually just burned to a crisp. It was horrible. That's all I can say. Is very, very horrible.
That is horrible.
And her husband and who was, like I said, his physical injuries were not so bad. He wanted to go up and collect his wife, even in the next morning. And the first responder said, no, she's too hot.
Wow.
It's horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, train derailments. I mean, we represented a number of people. I think we had 32 clients in the Metro Rock Island train derailment that happened back in 2005. And that train took a crossover that should have been at 10 miles an hour at 69 miles an hour. And the train literally hit the embankment and went flying, and 2 girls lost their lives, and one girl that we represented at trial to a $29 million verdict had a very significant brain injury. But the reality is, Conrad actually was out recently in Colorado investigating a derailment that happened out there. The reality is when a train derails, all hell breaks loose, literally. Yep. And sounds like your case.
You can't stop a train when it runs off the tracks.
Yep. Yep.
You both have you've brought up two, I think, of the most common causes of derailment. Both statistically and based on our experience, include human error, right-of-way problems, usually track issues, roadbed, including defective material, negligent construction, and negligent maintenance, mechanical failures in locomotives and rolling stock, and of course problems with signals, switches, and gates. Speeding, which would be a subspecies of human error, and poor weather, which is often a contributor to train crash derailments, but often is not the sole cause of a crash or derailment. Bill, as you mentioned, we've been involved in numerous high-profile derailments over the years. I want to talk a little bit more about the cause of the Canadian national crash.
Yeah.
You talked about, explain a little bit more about the concept of washout.
Yeah, that's what happened. There was a dramatic storm. We're used to them in the Midwest, especially during the summertime. And as a result, the storm had gotten so large so quickly that it was starting to wash out the bottom of the tracks. And if you got the tracks like here and you're going forward on the train, all of a sudden everything starts breaking up because there's nothing to support the tracks, especially when you've got an 18-car train going over it. I noticed that you put together leading causes of trail derailments being human factor, track-related issues, mechanical failures, speeding, and poor weather. Well, in our case, it was 4, perhaps 5 of those. Why? Human error. Well, the the engineer who was in charge of, like I said earlier, about a mile short of this, noticed that the train and the tracks were starting to have problems a mile away. So what did he do? Instead of trying to slow down and stop the train, he sped up because he knew there was an intersection coming up where there would be cars, and he just wanted to get over there as quickly as possible. Dumb, stupid thing to do, number one. Number two, you have track-related issues, including defects. Well, in this particular case, the tracks started breaking up. Number three, mechanical failures. Same thing. All of a sudden, the track started having a problem. And in this particular case, they made a phone call. Once they called the Rockford Police Department, once they made a phone call, he made a call to Canada, where the security for the Canadian National Railroads was. Then the Canadian National Railroad got on the phone immediately to the Rockford Police and said, get your behinds out there to this intersection because there's a train coming, and as a result, something's going to happen. Well, they didn't get out there quickly enough to stop traffic, and tell everybody, get out of your cars because there's a catastrophe that's about to happen. Speeding, we already went through that. He sped up rather than slowing down. And then finally, poor weather. The weather is the one that actually caused the problems with the track in the first place. It was a combination of everything. Unfortunately, it led to huge catastrophe.
So the heavy rain literally washes out the ballast underneath the track.
Washed it out,
Makes them
starting a
unstable.
mile earlier, and the conductor saw it. Should have stopped the truck. We argued should have stopped it as quickly as possible. It wasn't going that fast, but then he sped up because he knew that he had to get past this problem and wanted to get through it as quickly as possible.
And
Not a very smart thing to do.
Is that phenomenon of washout, is that known in the industry?
It is, and it's really funny. In this particular case, the lawyers and the people involved in the lawsuit here said, we've never heard that term before. Literally, we've never heard that term washed out before. Well, we had some experts that talked about not only is it a very common term, everybody in the railroad industry knows about it. And if you have train tracks that have been washed out, or if the support system underneath the tracks has been washed out, you can't use those tracks. It's like having we've seen earthquakes and what they've done in, say, California with roads. Same thing happens with something that's washed out. You just can't go over it. Well, this was a combination of a lot of separate errors, all combined to cause this tragedy. Yeah, washed out is a very common term.
Well, as we know, our lawsuits sometimes and often do effectuate change, right? And so I hope that the Canadian Pacific Railroad and other railroads learn their lesson.
One can only hope.
In our Metro derailment, we talked about something called positive train control. And it's technology that would prevent a train from going too fast through a 10-mile-an-hour zone. And at the time, Metro just didn't have positive train control technologies in place. It's one of the byproducts of a lawsuit is that hopefully we make the world a little bit safer. And certainly Metro enacting positive train control after our derailment, helped to make things safer. One of the things we haven't talked about, Conrad, with trains is we have train derailments where a train literally goes off the tracks and causes injury to people nearby or on the train. What about train crossings? I've heard terrible, terrible stories about individuals being injured or killed at train crossings. You've had some of those cases in the past, and I wonder if you could kind of fill us in on the issues in those cases.
Yeah, well, as with many of these topics, there's always a whole host of regulations that need to be followed as far as inspection, as far as who's supposed to inspect it. And in many cases, as in the case that I worked on, it was kind of a combination of our topics today, and that is where a tractor trailer carrying hazardous materials went across a crossing that was indicating a signal in adverse weather where visibility was limited, but the down stop bar was not operating. And so normally, and we see this sometimes in the day-to-day with how civilians may approach this, and you always sit there and you say, my goodness, do not go through that intersection. Well, you can imagine how that's compounded when you have a tractor trailer trying to force its way around there. And that's what happened in that case. And some of the regulations, for example, require, this applies, for example, to equipment that's being carried that has hazardous materials, which requires a special designation on a CDL, and it requires them to stop at the intersection with the tracks and inspect and look and make sure there is no train coming. We see that most frequently in an urban environment like this with school buses, and buses carrying passengers have that same requirement. Normally a truck can go through there, but in this situation should have stopped. This case did not stop from reports of witnesses and just went through, and it resulted in a tragic incident where certain chemicals were spilled in an area, resulting in injuries to some of the drivers in the area. So there, in that case, obviously, there's many points to look at. There's, well, what was wrong with the signaling system? Well, the signaling system company said, well, maybe the arm wasn't down, but the signals were working, so the truck shouldn't have gone through. So ultimately, it came down on the driver failing to follow the specific requirements. And some of them, the law is often based on common sense. So as you're listening to this, you're saying, yeah, it's common sense. Shouldn't have gone through it. But
right.
More specifically so in this case, it was a terrible outcome.
You mentioned a CDL for our listener out there. What is a CDL?
It's a commercial driver's license, something that is required for anybody that's operating a vehicle in a variety of different contexts. Passengers are one of them. Vehicles over 10,000 pounds, and in many of these cases, if, for example, you're doing interstate or even intrastate commerce, you're required to have that designation. And as I mentioned, if you're carrying hazardous materials, you need to have additional training and follow that training.
So we're kind of transitioning here into incidents involving trucks. You call them tractor trailers.
Yeah.
We call them trucks on the street. Can you tell us about your experience with just general trucking litigation?
Sure. Back in my past life as a defense lawyer, and certainly now also, I have some cases with Flip here and with you involving this type of litigation. Many of the factors that we heard about in train issues flow similarly into trucking litigation. And, it's changed a tremendous amount. The industry has changed. In the most recent years, we see that a lot of these companies are owner-operators. I think over 77% of them are owner-operators that own less than 5 trucks, many just 1 truck. And also the pressures of how they are paid. They are paid by the mile. And so it creates kind of a perverse system where they have a limited amount of time of the hours of service in which they have to get their deliveries to where they want to go. And if that's impacted by traffic, if that's impacted by bad weather, that doesn't really help them much. And so I've had several cases. One notable one that I remember was a tragic scenario where a tractor trailer was operating under heavy fog conditions. And he was going down the interstate and trying to make a delivery on time and came off of the highway, went on an overpass and crossed a road to make a turn. And in those conditions, a car that was coming across on the bridge did not see the truck. The visibility was about 5 feet in that case and went right under the trailer.
Wouldn't a trailer have reflective tape or lights or something to alert the motorist?
But it's supposed to. And in this case, some of those reflectors were missing, or because of the complete fog out conditions, could not be determined. It was a completely gray trailer without any writing or something distinct that could be seen upon it. But the most damning thing there was that there was evidence that other tractor trailers that were traveling on the interstate actually stopped because it was complete whiteout conditions. So they stopped and pulled over and noticed this guy passing, and the state police did interview them, and they indicated that, we can't believe that guy was still traveling, still operating.
Yep. Flip tried a case 10 years ago or so, where a tractor trailer driven by an operator hit a woman on the side of, was it 294?
Yeah,
And,
right on the southwest side.
One of the interesting things in that case, my memory is that it wasn't just the truck driver and the, who was an owner operator or a small trucking company, but there was actually was it a logistics company or a shipper that ended up being ultimately responsible for the truck's operations?
What happens is, invariably in cases like this, as Conrad just said, the actual drivers of the car, or the trucks, they call them carriers. They're the ones that have the load in the back, and it's their job to go from point A to point B. But they get hired by what are known as brokers or shippers. The brokers and shippers deal with the people who manufacture or whose job it is to have the property in the back of the carrier trucks from point A to point B. So as a result, it's a two-tiered system. As Conrad also just said, most of the carriers, the small trucking companies, they may not have more than 5 trucks, and they're completely underinsured, I would say. That's right now the law is, I believe it's $1 million of insurance. Those of us who do cases like this will tell you, anytime a truck gets into an accident, oh boy, there's going to be a lot more damage, not only to the property in the back and other property, other trucks, other cars on the road, but also to people in those cars, in those trucks. And in our case, it was a young mother who had a husband and a young family. And again, she got out to clean up or to prepare to have a tow truck come because she had on 294 South, she had a flat tire.
Okay.
Couldn't go any further, had to get out of the truck.
So she's on the shoulder.
She's on the shoulder doing everything she should have. And she wanted to get out quickly to find out how bad it was so she could then get back in the car or away from the car and then make a phone call to AAA or to another tow service to come out and help her out. Meanwhile, there's another truck coming and doesn't do anything to avoid her as close as she was. As we all know, you have a flat tire and you pull over into the side of the road. There's not a lot of room between the remaining foot or so you might have on the shoulder and then part of the throughway. And as a result, another truck came along and killed her. The question in that particular case was the driver of the truck that killed her, was he a representative of the larger company? In this particular case, it's called a broker. And as a result, that was where the legal fight was. Not so much that the driver should have done something differently, but who was he actually working for? So we had to go through all of the contracts. We had to apply the law that talks about, who exactly the truck driver was actually working for. Was he working for the small company that had 4 or 5 trucks, which was horribly underinsured?
Right.
Or was he working for the company that actually hired that truck? And we were working through all of Illinois' sometimes esoteric, arcane laws about who somebody is working for in any particular time, based upon the type of actions that they are, based upon the contracts that were shared by both companies, et cetera, et cetera. Fortunately, we were able to keep the larger company, which had a larger insurance policy, involved in the case. And it was a result, we got a pretty nice verdict for the family.
Well, that was great lawyering. It's more than meets the eye in a trucking case.
Oh yeah, it's less facts and more law.
Right. There really is some digging that really needs to happen as to what trucking company is utilizing the Federal Motor Carrier number, who they're shipping things for, why they're shipping it, who's controlling the driver's actions, when they're supposed to be to a place. Lawyers that do what we do, need to investigate all those things and really get down to more than just meets the eye, but all of the levels of potential insurance coverage.
In that particular case, it was like one of these things. Who's to blame? One trucking company is saying the other one saying, of course, the original one was. And like I said, we had as many legal arguments as we did factual arguments.
That's a good point, because it's really kind of two-tiered. You got arguments over who's to blame in terms of the negligence, the causes of the collision, but also who's legally responsible for that negligence, for the injuries that are caused. And that can be a different question. It can be different people. At first blush, a truck driver falls asleep or he's been driving for 14 hours straight and rear ends somebody, that's open and shut, right? Why would you need more than one person as a defendant in the case? But having adequate resources to compensate the plaintiff for the harms and losses is an important step. And you brought up several times standards and regulations. Who regulates? What jurisdiction regulates trucks and trucking companies?
So interestingly, primarily it falls under the federal government. It's the Department of Transportation. There are requirements, for example, on what it takes to get a DOT number and when that is required. And the general requirement is, well, if you're operating in interstate commerce, vehicle over a certain size, transporting cargo or passengers over a certain number. But what has happened, and for example, in some of the major transportation hubs like Illinois and Texas, for example, have adopted that, and they have made that a requirement that you need a federal DOT number. So the CFRs, usually in the 390 series, not to bore our listeners, outline various inspection requirements, licensing requirements, requirements for medical cards and employee retention and document record retention requirements for companies, even if they are just a owner-operator. So some of these requirements that you would expect, some of the major carriers you see on the road, that they have to hold these records, an owner-operator is still required to maintain all of those same requirements as well.
Let's talk about that. So let's say you have a situation with a truck involved in a collision. On the tractor is Jones and Sons Trucking, right? And they employ one driver or two drivers, and one of them's in the cab. But the DOT number is also on the cab. Who's responsible financially, potentially, for those injuries?
Well, as we'd like to say, everybody, right? But there's also a danger in making assumptions, because the way the trucking industry works, especially with equipment, trailers, they're bought and sold all the time. And some companies might leave certain markings on there, some might take them off. There's a requirement you have to have your current DOT number on the tractor or trailer identification, but you can't rely on that. So to some of the earlier points on how document intensive this is, you got to look at the paper. You have to see who's signing off on things, who's the real owner. We also see many of these companies, since they are small and since they have maybe limited coverage, they change all the time. So you will do a search of a certain company. They were in business for a year. It changed into another similarly named company. And when you start tracking down who the owners are, through probably one of the best resources we have, and that's the Safer website, which the Department of Transportation operates, where you can look up by DOT number, by name, a company, and it'll give you a report telling you their insurance, number of accidents they've had in the past 24 months, whether they've been fatal, whether there's been a tow. So that's a good starting point to verify what you may see, for example, on a police report. And we all know there's very oftentimes incorrect information on a police report, not listing everybody or listing something they just saw in a trailer that may not be right.
One of the things that I think, talking about technology in train crashes, in truck cases, the technology that exists today in our world, seems to me that there's a lot of evidence that's available to someone that has been injured immediately following a truck crash. And we know from our experience with our opponents, and you know from your time representing trucking companies, that when something catastrophic happens, those companies are out there instantaneously collecting evidence and building their case in defense of the case. What would be your, I guess, recommendation to somebody that's out there that's been a victim of a crash involving a truck in relation to retaining a lawyer?
Bill, if from my perspective as a former defense lawyer and now a plaintiff's lawyer, if someone, the takeaway I want people to have okay, from my perspective on that is exactly what you just said. When you, as a victim of a horrific accident involving a truck or a loved one of yours, and while you're sitting there worrying about your own injuries, or in the worst case scenario, planning funeral arrangements for your loved one, at that very moment, there is, if it's a larger company, they have their lawyers out there, they have their investigators out there, they are talking to witnesses, they are taking statements. And if it's a smaller company with any reasonable insurance company, that insurance company is doing all of those things and essentially already beginning to build a case against the victim. So get representation quickly while you are dealing with getting better, healing from your injuries, taking care of your loved ones. Have somebody on your side to reach out to our office. So that
you need an advocate. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
it's just an unequal playing field.
And it's so unfair, as I mentioned. It's when you're at the most vulnerable and horrible time of your life, you're expected to do this. No, you're not. Have us do that. That's what we're here for.
And that way we can ensure that the video of the occurrence is preserved, that the data downloads are accurate, that all of the physical evidence is not destroyed, right? Because we've all seen, unfortunately, cases where those things at the time that we get involved have disappeared. And then the injured person is no longer on the same level playing field as the trucking company. And like you said, it's just not fair. So I think that's a good point, that as terrible as it is in the face of tragedy, people need to be seeking adequate representation early after an incident.
Can I jump in? I just wanted to also include, you mentioned data recorders.
Yeah.
What's wonderful in the last probably 15, 20 years is that all these major trucking lines all have data recorders in their trucks. Most cars now on the road have data recorders in there. So if you have a car collision with a truck, or a truck with another truck, or a car with another car, they all have these data recorders for the most part. And you have to have, in our business, a very good engineering company that you have a working relationship with, so that if you find out on a Friday night there's been a horrible crash on the Kennedy Expressway where a truck has wiped out another car and killed 3 people in the car, you have to be able to pick up the phone on Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, and say, I need your help. Meet me out there where the car is being stored on Monday morning. Bring your crew, bring your equipment with you. And then we also have to serve a preservation letter on the trucking company. For those listeners who may not know what a preservation letter is, it's pretty simple. It's what it is. You let the trucking company know, do not destroy any evidence. Do not do anything that can be viewed as interfering with the normal data recorder, and don't have your people look at it until we can look at it as a team, my team and your team. And we can find out how fast the car was going. We can find out how fast the trucking company was, the truck itself was going, things of that particular nature. It's no longer what eyewitnesses say, as we all know now. It's what you can prove. And you can really only prove where there's no human involvement in it by what the data tells you once they do the data loads, the data of extraction.
Yep.
And it's wonderful. It makes our job not so much easier, but it gives us an added quiver in our belts to be able to use. And they'll tell you that these data recorders are very, very specific. They tell you everything: how many lights were on, how many lights were burned out, how fast the truck was going at the point of collision, et cetera, et cetera. And the same thing for the car.
In our airplane podcast, we were talking about black box.
Yeah.
That the airplanes, have a black box which tells you all the data. That's essentially the same thing that you're talking about. In a car or a truck, there's a black box.
Yeah.
That will tell you the last time that the brake was pressed, how fast the car was going at the time of the collision, all those details. And I think Conrad's point is really good, is that we need to have that early, because if it's destroyed, it could really defeat somebody's case. In
our trucking cases, I have to rely upon an expert whose sole job is to interpret the Code of Federal Regulations, as Conrad was talking about, the CFRs. They get into the minutia about what drivers are expected to do, what drivers are expected not to do. And if there's a collision, they parse it all out and say, according to the CFR number 190-3.75, that'll explain what the duties of the truck driver in our particular cases were supposed to have done that they didn't do, or that they did that they should not have done. And you basically have to hire somebody with an expertise about those CFRs and bring them into case. We hire them as expert witnesses, and they can then break down the CFRs to show exactly where the truck driver did something that he or she should not have done.
It's not always as high tech as that as well. When you're dealing with transportation cases, you're dealing with equipment that literally was designed to move all over the country and all over the world. Particularly in intermodal cases, you've got to get out there, identify the equipment involved, and get out and inspect it. I represented a gentleman who lost most of a hand because of a improperly loaded shipping container on one of the chassis, the trailer chassis. We chased that chassis all over the country. Ended up, I think he picked it up in Dalton. I ended up going down to Central Illinois to inspect it, weeks later. But it's, all the way from the tires up to the event data recorders.
Driver fatigue, how, you mentioned that earlier. I mean, that's got to be one of the leading causes of truck crashes. Are there regulations that truck drivers only can be behind the wheel for a certain amount of time? How do you as a lawyer investigate just how long a truck driver has been behind the wheel leading up to a crash?
Well, they're required to keep logs, okay, and they are limited on how many hours they can be on duty. There are certain exceptions to those, but generally it starts at 11 hours after a 10-hour rest period. There are certain exceptions that can take that up to 14. For example, adverse weather is one of them. Now, on its face, that seems like, oh, okay, so it's snowing or rainy, so you have more time to do that. Well, no, if you drill down to the specifics, and as Flip mentioned, when you hire an expert that says, well, yeah, but that regulation requires that adverse weather was not known. So you're really talking about a sudden occurrence. And we all know that drivers, very often like pilots, they look on their route. They know what's happening. They try to plan as best they can to avoid bad weather or get around it. To the earlier point of preservation, you need to, as fast as you can, make sure that those records showing where the driver was, and to Flip's point with technology, many of these trucks do have GPS. So you compare what the logs say of where they were and how long they were driving, and where the GPS data shows they were, and sometimes you'll have a conflict. And if they don't, if it's a smaller company that doesn't have that type of technology, well, you look at what's in their pocket, and that's a cell phone. And with very specific subpoena requests, you can get certain data on cell tower point. Now, it's difficult. Not every company has that, but that's another thing you can do. It says, all right, well, you said you were over here at this time, but how'd your phone get, 400 miles ahead of that? So it takes a lot of investigation very early. But again, the fatigue is a huge issue because they are pressed to make the miles. It's the miles and how they're paid. And we can all imagine how many instances we've been driving on the highway in a snowstorm, and all of a sudden you see this semi-truck just fly by you in the left lane, and you're wondering, oh my goodness, right? And sometimes down the road you see them off the road. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing somebody that's trying to make those miles during adverse conditions, which is, like in Flip's train case, the exact opposite of what they should do. They should slow down and stop.
I think that's a very good illustration of kind of what is our central task, which is to explain to the jury why this happened, the root cause, not just not the nearest or the latest, or the lack of a turn signal or a driver being fatigued, but why was he fatigued, and then why was that level allowed? Who's actually making the money? Who's providing these disincentives to safety? That's part of our process in every case, is to trace that back up the chain to the people who are making the money and trying to insulate themselves from responsibility for the deaths and the injuries caused by the people who are out there on the road.
And if I can say this about the brokers, who are the companies that put together the deals for truck A to go from point A to point B, and then the actual carriers, small town mom and pop operations with 4 or 5 small trucks, what will inherently happen is that in order to maintain control, the broker companies, they will require that the drivers, maintain some sort of system, electronic system, so that they can monitor them all along the route.
Yep.
And that helps us also when all of a sudden, like Conrad said, you're allowed to drive, is it 10 hours with an 11-hour break? Sometimes they're driving 14, 15 straight hours because they're trying to make up time for whatever reason, because the sooner they can get to the destination to unload, then the sooner they can get another load and go to another point somewhere in the United States. It's all money. That's all it is. But the brokerage companies have been helping us by maintaining the responsibility of telling the carriers, the drivers, you have to check in with us wherever. Let us know where you are at. And of course, that's one of the quickest ways, because it's technology, telling us, well, you're only supposed to go X number of hours, and he went 3 or 4 more hours after that. And
Very good
invariably,
point.
like you said, you see them when they're passing you, and then you see them 20 miles down the road, and they're on the side of the road, it's overturned, there's 3 police cars, whole lanes are all blocked off, and some tragedy has happened.
Well, this firm certainly has had quite a record of successfully representing individuals that have been the victims of trucks and train crashes. The first ever $8-figure verdict, a $12 million jury verdict in Illinois was obtained by this firm. $40 million trucking verdict was provided to a family, which was the largest verdict at the time. A record-setting $22 million verdict, which is the largest compensatory verdict for an individual ever upheld by the Illinois Supreme Court. Flips $8 million verdict that we've talked about. And I think the listener, understands how and why it is that we've been so successful in these cases, because it's not just what you think at first blush. It's not just saying, well, there's only $1 million of insurance, and that's what we're stuck with. We go the extra mile and ensure that our clients are provided that equal playing field, right? And ensure that when they're deserving of significant compensatory damages, we're going to find a way to get it for them.
I had a case back in 2008. I still remember it was right before President Obama became President Obama. The economy was in the tank. It was a big deal. It was a big part of the election between Senator Obama and Senator McCain, if you might remember.
Yep.
And I represented a family where the husband was in his early 30s. He had a wife in the middle 20s, and they had 2 young, beautiful daughters. They were coming back from a family reunion in downstate Illinois and heading back to Dayton, Ohio, using the expressways. Well, I believe it was on Route 70, and all of a sudden it came to a halt because of construction, and the car stopped. Unfortunately, because of fatigue, the driver of a truck right behind them fell asleep and ran right up into them, killing the wife and mother and killing one of the daughters. Saddest case. And there was only $1 million of insurance. And in that particular case, there was no broker. All we could do is take the $1 million. And I did something I've never done in a case before. I told the insurance company and I told the defendant's trucking company, I said, I'm not going to take the $1 million. You're going to have to give me another $1 million in cash. Oh, we can't do this. The economy's going into the tank. We don't have any money. We don't know if we're going to be around in another month. I said, I don't care. I really don't care. That is your problem, not mine. You should have gotten more insurance. And fortunately, the case was in federal court down here at 219 South Dearborn. And I had a very helpful judge, somebody that everybody likes in our business. Mm-hmm. And I said, Judge, you got to lean on them, because I'm not going to settle this case. We're going to go. It's a simple case to try. And I'm going to get a huge verdict in this particular case. And if I have to bankrupt in this trucking company because of that, because they didn't get enough insurance, that's their problem. It's not going to be mine. and we'll see what we can do. After some hemming and hawing, all of a sudden, the judge called the defense attorneys in and said, Corboy's serious. He's ready to go to trial. If it means he has to bankrupt your company because of your, I won't call it malfeasance, but you need more than $1 million of insurance when you're in a big truck and you're on the highways. And you've got, in particular like this, where you have a small car, it's creamed from behind. And sometimes you have to do that. You have to look at them in the eye and just say, hey, I don't care if you only got $1 million. We're going to get more. And it'll be your problem on how to pay off that judgment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would advise younger lawyers to do that more often.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about insurance, you're talking about liability coverage, correct?
Right.
And that's insurance that, everyone has to have it on their car, right?
Yep.
The point is to protect other people from our mistakes. So if we injure somebody, through operating our car, we've protected them. And the potential for damage, potential for injury as that goes up, so on the one hand, you're protecting yourself and your family and your assets, but you're also protecting everybody else. And responsible companies make sure that they have adequate coverage to protect people from inevitable mistakes.
We all know in today's world when a truck gets into an accident, all hell, like we said, one more time, all hell breaks loose. And if you hit another car, if you hit another truck, bad things are going to happen. And a lot of the trucking companies say, well, it's a minimum. It's required under the federal laws. We have to have $1 million worth of insurance. Yeah, that's right. That's how much is your minimum. You have to have more. If you are a good corporate partner, if you are a good company that cares about other people other than the bottom line. You know and I know with these trucks streaming down the highway on an interstate, 80 miles an hour, they're flying past you. That something's going to happen more often than not. Get more insurance.
Yeah, the sheer size of a truck is, potential for catastrophe.
I get very nervous when all of a sudden I'm on an interstate and I drive around a lot, and all of a sudden there's a truck right next to me. I calculate, put my foot on the accelerator, get a couple hundred yards ahead of this truck, or lay back. All it takes is for a truck driver to cause major havoc is reach down for a cell phone, talk on a cell phone. I've even seen them with televisions.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah.
They have a television on. They're watching Bob Barker on Let's Make a Deal or something.
Right.
You see these things, and I'm like, who's ever with me, I say, holy Christ, look at this. They're watching TV while they're going 75, 80 miles an hour.
Apparently, there's YouTube videos of truck drivers.
It's amazing to me that with modern social media and TikTok and streaming, there are some drivers that actually are streaming their drives out there. Just show this is what my day-to-day, this is what my life is like. And so we talked about fatigue, but the distraction, like you mentioned, Flip, that's huge. I mean, that's a problem for all kinds of drivers, texting this and that and the other. Well, just imagine that being compounded when it is, in fact, your job to drive all day, every day, long distances.
Time means money to truck drivers.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And it's an important point to remember that when you're investigating and trying these cases, these drivers are professionals. They're held to a professional standard. And you mentioned experts in trucking and train cases. Those are the types of folks that we seek out to prove what those standards are, and they're not the same as driving to church on Sundays.
That's right. And talking about that, I just was reminded of an instance on how when we talk about early investigation and getting on top of things right from the inception of something like this, is how some drivers try to get away from, or they try to hide their streaming or watching videos. And recalling one case where it's very important when you subpoena cell phone records and something like that, that you also inquire about spouses and kids. And why? Because some of them actually have ghost phones that they're using to stream and watch videos. So theirs is right away in their pocket, but they're using a family member's account. And so you got to dig a little bit deeper. And that's something that a lot of people would not have thought of. But again, they get bored out there. And when they get bored, they do things like this. And unfortunately, when they do things like this, it can end in tragedy.
Yep. Any final thoughts on trucks and trains and safety?
Always act as if you're very scared of a truck on the road. Seriously, when they get, like I said, for the fourth time today, they get into an accident, all hell breaks loose.
Yep.
And you've got to act defensively, I think.
Well, Flip, thank you very much for joining us on the
Thanks for
Masters
having
of
me.
Trial Law podcast. And Conrad, we're glad you could be with us today to share your insights with the Masters of Trial Law.
It's an honor to be among you.
You can find us on Corboy and Demetrio's YouTube channel, at Corboy Demetrio, the official home of Masters of Trial Law. And we want to hear from you. So if there is a listener out there, or a watcher, you can email us at podcast@corboydemetrio.com, and we will provide our feedback to any questions or inquiries you have. Any final thoughts, Ken?
But don't do it while you're driving.